Väterchen Stalin gave his troops the right to rape, to steal, to kill, to do whatever they want to do. And believe me, they did.
It's quite painful and sad when women who volunteered to contribute to the country's peace and economy are portrayed as victims of circumstance.
And then the person had to get up, the woman, and they didn't take her outside the basement. They put her against the wall, and they stood in line with their machine gun pointing at us and raped the woman.
In today's video, we will discuss the positions that heroic women had during WW2, as well as the importance of their work in the many countries involved. Grab a seat as today's video will reveal how women were patriotic to their country. Answering the call. A warlike encounter affects more than only high-level leaders, political leaders, and army personnel. Many times, the economy for the middle and lower social strata becomes even more problematic, particularly if the individual who provides for the family is forced to take up arms. Women are humiliated simply for exercising talents and performing superfluous tasks to appease authority. Most of these women were citizens of their countries, and many women who participated were affected during the wartime. The Second World War in particular required the support of the country's female folk. Given the scarcity of personnel to carry out most jobs, they filled the positions that were previously reserved only for men. Despite that, often the images that come to mind when we talk about the war are mainly of battles. The soldiers fighting deadly battles on land, massive navy patrolling the seas, and airplanes gliding sleekly overhead. Of fact, all of these evocative images are accurate, but they are also incomplete without the women who participated. This fact, unfortunately, is ignored. On the home front, World War II altered the lives of both men and women in several ways, but mostly especially women. The wartime labor demands increased female workers, increased family problems and duties, and increased pressures on Americans to comply with social and cultural norms. All of these developments prompted Americans to reconsider their views on gender, including how women should behave and look, what characteristics they should possess, and what responsibilities they should play in their families and communities. Rosie the Riveter. Rosie the Riveter, one of the war's most popular emblems, embodies wartime gender transformations for women. For many Americans, Rosie represents a powerful woman, rolling up her denim shirt sleeve to display her right bicep and confidently exclaiming, "We can do it." She was one of 19 million women who worked for pay during the war, including 5 million for the first time. During World War II, married women outnumbered single women in the labor force, and many of them were mothers. Also, the federal government and wartime companies maintained that these women were critical to victory. But working women challenged most Americans' perceptions of the normal roles of men and women. By portraying women workers, the federal government and industrial leaders strove to calm a wary public and restrict the potentially profound gender shifts that women's labor posed. Rosie may have taken on new duties riveting airplanes or creating bombs, as well as many posters, films, and newsreels, but she maintained her feminine appearance with manicured nails, neatly applied lipstick, and styled hair. But the story was a sham. Despite her assured demeanor and ability, Rosie the Riveter was merely a fad, anxious to trade in her welding goggles and steel-toed boots for domestic happiness at the end of the war. The benefits of war ends with the war. When triumph arrived, some women were eager to return to domestic life, but even those who wanted or needed to continue working found their options severely limited as men returned home and demand for war products fell. Without the war to excuse women's unorthodox labor, many companies drove them out of higher-paying jobs they had held during the war, out of the workforce entirely, or into lower-paying, less secure pink-collar jobs. Many women who embraced the challenges and benefits of wartime labor found it transformative, but personnel regulations at the end of the war pushed men and women back into occupations that fitted with pre-war gender understandings. The female bias extended to men. Men on the home front discovered that the war posed a variety of potential challenges to commonly held beliefs about their proper roles. While many men saw women's growing positions as a threat, their status as civilians posed another. The popularization of combat soldiers as ideal men excluded civilian men, who responded by associating themselves in other ways with acceptable conceptions of manhood. More than 50,000 men who earned conscientious objector status were the furthest removed from the idealized picture of manhood, often labeled as cowards, traitors, effeminate, or homosexual. These men were put under intense pressure to demonstrate their bravery, commitment, and readiness to defend their values. Many of them volunteered for perilous labor like fighting forest fires or participating in risky medical studies to demonstrate that, while they opposed military service, they were no less men than soldiers. The daily lives of women and men on the American home front changed dramatically as a result of wartime demands. Many Americans embraced war production jobs as a way to broaden their roles and image in society, as well as to connect with soldiers' work. Others fought any perceived danger to the traditional boundaries between men's and women's work. People reevaluated these positions in the context of their own experiences, which were molded by elements such as ethnicity, class, region, religion, and a variety of others. By the end of the war, gender understanding had both grown and remained stable. Popular concepts of gender remained mostly intact. However, fractures had appeared that would later disrupt the mold. Gender discrimination. Gender roles in all forms have existed for generations and continue to exist today. That is correct. Even though women have proven their talent and worth during the war, they still had a long way to go before society truly accepted this fact. Women were not allowed to act outside of their socially recognized work under any circumstances at a time when the demarcation of gender roles was extremely obvious. Initially, the government, corporations, and society as a whole were unwilling to accept women in positions that should have been filled by men. They thought women lacked talents and power. However, time was of the essence. During World War II, gender discrimination against women was prevalent in various ways, but it also marked a significant shift in the roles and perceptions of women in society. Here are some key aspects of gender discrimination during that time. Limited employment opportunities. Before the war, women were primarily expected to work in traditional roles such as homemakers, teachers, or nurses. Many industries were reluctant to hire women in non-traditional jobs. When the war created a shortage of male workers, women were allowed to take on jobs in factories, munitions plants, and offices. But these opportunities were often seen as temporary and were paid less than what men received for similar work. Gender wage gap. Women who entered the workforce during World War II faced a significant gender wage gap. They were typically paid less than men for doing the same jobs, despite their contributions being essential to the war effort. Discrimination and harassment. Women in non-traditional roles often encountered discrimination and harassment from male colleagues who were not accustomed to working alongside them. This hostile environment made it challenging for women to excel in their jobs. Stereotypes and expectations. Society held traditional gender roles and stereotypes, which limited women's opportunities and perceptions of their capabilities. Women who worked outside the home were sometimes criticized or viewed with suspicion. Limited advancement opportunities. While women proved their competence in various roles during the war, they still faced obstacles when it came to career advancement. Few women held leadership positions, and promotions were often harder to attain compared to their male counterparts. Unequal treatment in the military. Women who served in the military during WW2 often received lower pay and fewer benefits than male service members. They were largely relegated to support roles rather than combat positions. Post-war reversion. After the war ended, there was a push for women to return to their pre-war roles as homemakers and caretakers, leading to a reversion of gender norms and a loss of some of the progress made during the war years. Despite these challenges, World War II marked a turning point in women's history, as their contributions to the war effort demonstrated their capabilities and resilience. The war's impact on women's roles laid the foundation for the feminist movement and the gradual shift toward greater gender equality in the decades that followed. However, both the American military and those of her allies required weapons, food, and services, all of which were in limited supply due to a lack of people. Those who resisted hiring women to meet these demands had no choice but to sacrifice their old-fashioned pride and employed women to carry out many roles. The war created a great number of job openings for men since many men were needed, including Major League Baseball stars and even CEOs of well-known corporations. As a result, women could hold almost 200 different roles. Initially, most jobs in most countries did not pose any danger to their lives. Most countries see women as a threat to their work and weak to the country's system in the century. Women were mostly left out and had to stay at home with their children. They were not treated fairly like the men. Better times at the Soviet. Nevertheless, during the Soviet Union, women were a major exception from the beginning. This country was the only country that allowed the participation of women both in the back and front lines, being integrated as full-fledged members of the army and not as mere auxiliaries. In World War II, the Soviet Union established women's military units such as the Night Witches, a famous all-female bomber regiment. It created opportunities for the infamous Soviet sniper Lyudmila Pavlichenko, among others, who played crucial roles in the war effort. These women showed immense bravery and contributed significantly to the Soviet victory. However, the term side liberation is not a commonly used phrase in a historical context, and it's important to acknowledge that women's contributions during the war extended far beyond just their roles in the military. Many mothers, spouses, young ladies, and daughters who matched the work requirements took on duties ranging from easy to intricate and perilous, even fighting as full-fledged soldiers. Women worked hard in construction, assisting males in jobs like truck driving, cutting lumber, working in factories, and building machinery. Not only did they contribute to the war effort, but they also supported their families with their time and energy, and some brave women even gave their lives. Several women stood their ground, were strong, and continued to perform most of the tasks despite the circumstances. Patriots. Women played essential roles on the home front, working in various industries and supporting the war effort in numerous ways. Furthermore, more than 1,000 of them served as snipers, shooting down about 12,000 confirmed enemies, the most outstanding being Lyudmila Pavlichenko. Among the other risky positions were the tank divisions, where Alexandra Samosenko reached the rank of captain. In 1939, Australia passed the National Security Act, which allowed the recruitment of women in the industrial branch, increasing the number of Australian salaried female employees from 644,000 to 855,000 within 5 years. Although this figure is minor, it is significant because it represents the number of traditionally female jobs that were abandoned to fulfill functions that were supposed to be exclusively male. Unfortunately, many were compelled to quit these responsibilities at the end of the war, serving with the Allies. Germany allowed women to serve as auxiliaries in the Navy, Air Force, and Army, though the majority were concentration camp guards, while in Nazi-occupied Poland, brave women served in the resistance, carrying messages, couriers, serving as medics, and even participating in combat. Wanda Gertz received the greatest honors for her bravery. Women were also pillars in countries like Canada, the United States, and the United Kingdom during the war. None of the three, however, were permitted to serve on the front lines. Instead, they worked in nursing, communications, weapon and war machine assembly, food harvesting, and even entertainment for the soldiers in the United Kingdom. The enlisted female auxiliaries had to go through all the training protocols and perform the same activities as their male counterparts, resulting in even better artillerymen. They would, however, be evacuated in the event of an assault. Dealing with promiscuity. Having to fight in harsh terrain under constant life-threatening danger is destined to cause excessive levels of stress. If the soldiers do not find a means to administer therapy, the stress will build up and cause serious damage to their health. As a result, the military's highest levels were aware that drinking, gambling, and above all, the women located in cities and towns near their outposts would be a huge temptation for soldiers searching for distraction and fun. It appears to be natural, but the actual issue arises when discussing sexual diseases, particularly among Germans. This was concerning because during the French occupation, the local ladies disabled more soldiers than the French army in 1940. As a result, the German army created regulations that had to be obeyed for their soldiers to enjoy these services. 2 controlled institutions were established where the soldiers might find ladies who were authorized to do such work. Some were professionals hired in both Germany and the countries in which they worked. Others were weak-willed women who preferred this service to forced work, and ultimately, they were prisoners of war. It should be mentioned that the majority of the enlistment was voluntary, though there have been allegations of troops betraying their trust. Anyone wishing to spend time with these maidens had to produce a previously obtained pass attesting to the soldiers' good health. In addition to supplying all of their information for easy and quick identification of the sick, they were provided protection and disinfection spray, which they were required to spray on the lady before beginning the task under the pain of being punished. Furthermore, propaganda was conducted to promote awareness about the dangers of venereal infections among uniformed men and to indoctrinate them to be more cautious when having pleasure with an unknown girl. During World War II, various aspects of sexual health and reproductive care for women evolved and faced unique challenges. Here are some key points regarding sex treatment and related issues during that time. Birth control and family planning. Birth control methods were not as advanced as they are today, but there was a growing interest in family planning. Access to contraception was limited, and women often had to rely on less effective methods. Sexually transmitted infections, STIs. As soldiers and civilians engaged in sexual relationships, the risk of STIs, such as syphilis and gonorrhea, increased. Efforts were made to educate individuals about prevention and treatment. Abortion. Abortion was illegal and used during this period. Many women cried bitterly and reacted to dangerous methods, risking their lives if they wanted to terminate a pregnancy. The availability of safe and legal abortion services varied greatly by location. Medical care for women. Women were limited to comprehensive access to services such as gynecological women and parental care, especially in war-affected areas. Women's health needs were often overlooked amid wartime priorities. Sexual violence. Women, especially those in war-front areas, were at risk of sexual violence and abuse. This issue remains a serious concern during times of conflict, and efforts to address it have evolved over the years. Women's roles in the war effort. Women played various roles during the World War, including in the military and as part of the war industry workforce. Their contribution led to a shift in societal perception of women's capabilities and paved the way for later advancement in gender equality. Post-war changes. After World War II, there were changes in attitudes towards sexuality and women's health. The post-war period saw advancement in medical knowledge, the availability of contraceptives, and the gradual expansion of women's reproductive rights. It's important to recognize that the experiences of women during World War II were diverse and influenced by factors such as location, cultural norms, and individual circumstances. Moreover, the historical context of the time greatly shaped the availability of sexual health treatments and services. The ugly carnivals. It is difficult for anyone living today to understand what it meant to be occupied by a foreign military force, the horrors and humiliation that inhabitants of various countries may have endured throughout the years it lasted. Without taking into account the circumstances, there is no reason for the terrible treatment meted out to women in German and French towns and villages, among others, for their allegedly disgraceful behavior. Immediately after the Allies liberated France, and with its residents' morale at rock bottom, they celebrated their liberation by causing even more pain. Also, the 65th anniversary of the D-Day landings this week provides an opportunity to revisit euphoric images of France's liberation in 1944. However, among the happy photographs are some that are frightening. These depict the fate of women accused of horizontal collaboration. It is tough to forget Robert Capa's image of a shaven-headed young woman cuddling her infant, implying a relationship with a German soldier. They searched out any lady suspected of having any kind of relationship with the enemy and publicly humiliated her by shaving her head and forcing her to wear a wig or even stripped off their clothes. An example was a woman standing in a village as two guys forcefully grip her wrists. A third man pulls a strand of her blonde hair, his scissors set to slice it away. Just as the punished were nearly always women, the punishers were almost always men acting without a legal mandate or court-granted power. While some were loyal resistance members, others had dabbled in collaborationist activities and were eager to clear their names before the mob turned on them as well. Approximately 6,000 people were slain during the Épuration Sauvage, although the movement's fierce, harsh public ferocity was not concentrated on severe collaborationist criminality. Instead, it focused on women accused of collaborating with the enemy. Likewise, not only to mention that beatings could also be part of these so-called ugly carnivals, this was an imitation of what the Germans did with those women who spent the night with non-Aryan or foreign prisoners. Apparently, This became a way to atone for the frustration and impotence of men humiliated by the occupation of their country. According to the account of historian Anthony Beaver, which is still deplorable, it is estimated that at least 20,000 women were victims of such primitive and unjust acts, as most were from the lower strata of society. These included ladies who offered their services, young mothers whose husbands were fighting on the front line or had already died and needed a means to support their families, and school teachers who were intimidated to provide shelter for the Germans. This practice was replicated in countries such as Belgium, Italy, Norway, Netherlands, and others. All wars are plagued by unethical and immoral acts disguised as ideals to defend. Over the week, the German forces continued to surrender, but the war was not over. There was still tension with Japan and Russia, and war financing was running low. At the Potsdam Conference, the three heads of state from the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union, Truman, Winston Churchill, and Joseph Stalin convened. This is where the fate of Germany and much of Europe was decided. Female contributions to the war. Almost 350,000 American women volunteered for the new task. During World War II, women played crucial roles in various military capacities in many countries. Here are some ways in which women participated in the military during World War II. Auxiliary services. Women served in auxiliary services like the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, WAAC, and Women's Air Force Service Pilots, WASP, in the United States. They filled non-combat roles, freeing up men for combat duty. Nursing. Nursing was one of the most common roles for women in the military. Women served as nurses, tending to wounded soldiers on the front lines and in hospitals. The industrial workwomen took on jobs in factories and industries, producing weapons, ammunition, and equipment for the war effort. Resistance fighters. In occupied countries, many women joined resistance movements, engaging in espionage, sabotage, and guerrilla warfare against the Axis powers, transport, and communication. Women worked as drivers, clerks, and radio operators, ensuring the smooth functioning of military logistics and communication, manufacturing, and industry. Women worked in factories and industries, producing essential war materials like aircraft, ammunition, and vehicles. They were often referred to as Rosie the Riveter. Anti-aircraft batteries. In some countries, including the UK, women served in anti-aircraft batteries, operating anti-aircraft guns to defend against enemy air raids. Code breakers. Women, such as those at Bletchley Park in the UK, played pivotal roles in breaking enemy codes and providing valuable intelligence. Partisan fighters. In Eastern Europe, many women joined partisan groups, fighting against Nazi occupation in forests and mountains. Propaganda and support. Women also worked in propaganda and support roles, encouraging morale through posters, radio broadcasts, and entertainment for troops. Military aviation. In the Soviet Union, female pilots known as the Night Witches flew night bombing missions. Women's contributions during World War II played a significant part in the overall war effort and had a lasting impact on the advancement of women's rights and roles in society. These contributions of women during World War II not only helped the war effort, but also paved the way for greater gender equality and opportunities in the post-war years. The West Coast and the Bay Area, where the women's contributions to the war effort were critical, exemplified these societal shifts the most. The war's significant social, cultural, and economic effects on women were most obvious in the Western United States, which had the country's highest percentage of female industrial workers. Women outnumbered men among the flow of migrants from the South and West seeking defense work in the Bay Area. This was due to the economic benefits of defense labor, as well as the number of women who relocated to be near men in the region's various military sites. The Bay Area's various shipyards hired the most women defense employees. At the end of the war, women made up 27% of the Richmond shipyard workforce and 20% of the Moore shipyard in Oakland. Nonetheless, like most businesses, Bay Area shipyards were hesitant to hire women until labor shortages forced them to. Women exerted pressure on defense firms for this well-paying employment, including a demonstration in San Francisco in front of the Boilermakers Union headquarters. While doors eventually opened wide for women in many defense factories, not all were gladly recruited. African Americans were more likely to find work in canneries, railroads, and military supply facilities, which earned half as much as working at a shipyard. Final thoughts. This video has shared how significant women participated during World War II but were publicly insulted. It has shown that women served in various roles on home gloss and military roles, but were paid less than the men for the same work and were limited to their career opportunities. The war did, however, pave the way for women's progress of their rights and eventually led to an increase in gender equality in many countries. Is the lowest pit humanity has sunk into, and it represents the greatest horrors we have done against our own species. The times we live in serve as a reminder of how hazardous our selfishness may be to the world and all of its people. What kind of horror stories will be written in the future? And how will our mothers, sisters, and daughters play a role in them, regardless of what is ahead?